Hi, I'm Claire, and this is my favourite fantasy in media other than books. For this week's BookTube SFF Babbles, we are focusing on games, film, and TV. Every year, the folks over at BookTube SFF Awards put out a series of discussion ideas for everyone to participate in, so I'll leave a link to that in the description box below if you'd like to have a look. So the topic for this week is SFF in media other than books, and I've already done a video focusing on the science fiction side of things, so you can check it out in a card above my head somewhere if you haven't seen it yet. And in the meantime, let's talk fantasy. Also, I should add that I'm not including any adaptations in this list. There are many excellent films and shows that are based on fantasy books that I love, but if I put them in, this video would be literally twice as long as it's already gonna be. So of course the solution is I'm gonna do a whole video about adaptations probably sometime in April or May. First up is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, created by Joss Whedon, which I have loved since it first graced my TV screen when I was in middle school in the late 90s. Of course, I was exactly the target audience for this show when it aired, so it's no surprise that I loved it then. But I've since done several full rewatches, and I'm currently addicted to the Buffy rewatch podcast Buffering the Vampire Slayer. The show has its faults, of course, but the storylines and particularly the characters are still my favorites. One thing I particularly love about this show is that, as I've mentioned, it stands up to a lot of rewatching. Also, I will never not tear up at the shot of the little girl playing baseball in the final episode of season 7, and that voiceover of Buffy explaining the plan and "Are you ready to be strong?" My goodness. Next up we have The Nightmare Before Christmas, a stop-motion musical film directed by Henry Selick based on a concept by Tim Burton. It's also the official soundtrack to the month of October. Although, let's be real, I own that soundtrack and I 100% listen to it year-round. On top of that, I love the aesthetic of this film. The claymation looks absolutely beautiful, and it gives the whole film this like cool, otherworldly, uncanny quality that I don't think you'd get from like a smoother animation style. There's a lot of really cool detail packed into this movie, which makes it great to rewatch over and over. And it's also really funny, even in tragic moments, like when Sally is sewing her own arm back onto her body, for instance. I love Sally, her design is so cool, and she's my favorite character to cosplay ever. Next we have Lego Harry Potter. This is a puzzle game where you play as Lego figurines of various characters from the Harry Potter series, and you have to use spells to move around the castle, which is of course also made of Lego. I should really say that it's 2 games because it's split between years 1 to 4 and years 5 to 7, but you get the gist. I'm including these here because I don't really consider them an adaptation of the series so much as a chance for me to hang out and have fun in that world with those characters while enjoying the cuteness of Lego at the same time. I don't play these very regularly, but they're really easy to pick back up anytime, and it's always a great bit of fun when I dive back in. Next is something that's a bit more fantasy adjacent, I guess, but I'm counting it in because I love it so much, and that is the special effects and makeup show Face Off. This airs on the Sci-Fi Network in the US, but tragically it's really hard to find in the UK. Season 1 is on Amazon Prime Video, but I can't find any other season anywhere else, and that is just frankly unfair and upsetting to me. I should say Face Off is one of those competition shows where contestants have to do a bunch of challenges. They create sci-fi and fantasy characters, and then one person gets eliminated every week. This kind of show is my catnip anyway, but what I especially love about Face Off is that most contestants are incredibly sweet and really supportive of each other. I mean, it's pretty much a Great British Bake Off, but for special effects and without Paul Hollywood, so we're all winning here. Next up is Beetlejuice, a comedy film directed by Tim Burton, all about a couple of very nice ghosts and the dreadful living humans who move into their house after they die. This is an old favourite that I actually haven't rewatched in a while, but I love the representation of the afterlife in that film. Both the kind of realm beyond that the characters have to visit, where there's like afterlife bureaucracy, and also the part of it that's in their house where they have to learn how to be scary, haunting ghosts if they want Catherine O'Hara to ever leave their house. Obviously some stuff here is a bit gruesome, but there's also something kind of comical and quite affecting about the mundanity of the afterlife. This is another film that's very stylized, where I really like the aesthetic of it and all the little details and ideas that went into it. Also, I bloody love Lydia. Next is Total War Warhammer II, a turn-based strategy, real-time tactics video game developed by Creative Assembly, using classic Total War mechanics and gameplay and mixing that in with the world of Warhammer Fantasy. This is obviously a relatively new favourite of mine since the game only came out in 2017, but I've been into Warhammer for a really long time, and it's been great to be able to experience Warhammer in this completely new way, where I don't really have to worry about not being able to afford buying a bajillion minifigurines to make a giant army, or not having the time or skill to paint them, or not knowing where to find people to play with. All of the things that often felt like barriers to me being able to enjoy the tabletop game. I'm singling out the second game as specifically my favourite because that's the one that has dark elves in it, and dark elves are what got 16-year-old me hooked into this franchise. But I do really love the fact that the video games, both of them, allow you to try different factions or different configurations for your army in a way that it would be a lot more difficult to do with the tabletop game, a lot more expensive. Also, having an actual campaign as opposed to a single battle, that's awesome. Next up is The Good Place, a fantasy comedy series created by Michael Schur, one of the co-creators of Parks and Rec and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, two other shows that are absolute favourites of mine. We follow Eleanor Shellstrop, a young woman who arrives in The Good Place after she dies. It's this beautiful heaven-like neighbourhood that's been designed to reward its inhabitants for the ridiculous amounts of good deeds that they did during their lives on Earth. Except Eleanor knows that she shouldn't have been sent to the good place. She's there by mistakes, she wasn't all that great of a human during her time on Earth, so she decides to try and become a better, more morally upstanding person so that if she's ever found out as like not belonging there, she might be able to stay in a good place anyway. I don't want to say too much more about this show because I truly think that it's worth getting into it with as few spoilers as possible if you are able to do that, but I do have to mention the writing on this show is amazing. I've been extremely impressed with the narrative so far. The show doesn't usually go the way that you expect it to, and there are lots of twists and turns. I genuinely consider it the best show that I'm currently following. Next up is the board game Small World, which was designed by Philip Kea. In Small World, players control fantastical creatures, and the point of the game is to expand across the map as far as possible. However, as the title suggests, it is a bit of a squeeze. Now, there are two really cool game mechanics that I love in Small World. The first is that no race or fantastical creature can rule Small World forever. So after a few turns, you'll run out of options and you'll have to put your civilization into decline. You're no longer an empire of trolls. Now you're playing as the elves. But that's not the only thing that makes this game ridiculously fun and incredibly replayable. Every time you start a new civilization, you have to choose what fantastical creature you want to play as and also what modifier you want to give them. So it's not just humans or giants or tridents, it's like flying dwarves and underworld elves and alchemist ghouls and berserker amazons and wealthy rat men. And of course all of them have different power sets and you have to take those into account when you're picking them. Also, shout out for the best game box design of any game I own. Everything has its own designated place and it fits and it makes me so happy. Now for something a bit different, Penelope. This is a delightful fantasy rom-com about a young woman from a noble family who was born with the ears and snout of a pig because one of her ancestors was a scumbag and the whole family got cursed by a witch for his scumbagginess. Penelope lives this incredibly sheltered life with her parents, who believe that the only way to break the curse is for Penelope to marry someone of noble birth. They have this whole setup for suitors to talk to Penelope through a one-way mirror, but she's really not that interested in them and mostly enjoys scaring them away, until one suitor doesn't run away screaming after she shows her face. And on top of not being afraid of her, he's played by James McAvoy, so who can blame Penelope for being suddenly interested? Of course, things aren't quite as they seem and there are a bunch of twists and turns before the big finale, and I can't stress just how delightful and adorable and funny this film is. Also, as I mentioned, James McAvoy is in it and that is always a plus, but the rest of the cast is equally amazing. Christina Ricci plays Penelope and the supporting cast includes Reese Witherspoon, Peter Dinklage, Catherine O'Hara, and Richard E. Grant. Like, what's not to love? I want to rewatch this film, like, immediately. Finally, Avatar: The Last Airbender is an animated TV series created by Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, which is set in an Asian-inspired fantasy world where some people can control the elements by magic. Most people can only bend the one element, but the Avatar, whose job it is to keep the world in balance, is the only person who can master all 4 elements. When the series starts, the Avatar hasn't been seen for 100 years and war is raging. But then the Avatar turns up at the North Pole, frozen in an iceberg, and he's 12 and he hasn't mastered all 4 elements at all yet. And now he and his friends who found him in the iceberg have to go and save the world. It's got iconic lines like "My first girlfriend turned into the moon," and iconic characters like badass tea-loving Uncle Iroh, and even iconic ship wars. Again, what's not to love? I also really liked The Legend of Korra, but I haven't actually seen all of that yet. I should definitely do a catch-up / rewatch. So that's it. Those were some of my favorite fantasy TV shows, movies, and games. I know there's a lot more I haven't had time to put in my eyeballs yet, so let me know in the comments if you have any recommendations for me, or if you just want to mention your own fantasy favorites. If you haven't seen my favorite science fiction media video yet, you should definitely check that out. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check out a previous video right about here. And if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button that's on my face right here for new videos from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.